everyone. Everything is good? Everything working? Okay, super, perfect. So, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining early this morning for this conference. My name is Caroline Bassoni. I'm coming from France. I'm currently the Reg Affairs Director of COSMED. I will explain what COSMED is doing. I'm working in the cosmetic industry since more than 20 years. I've been in regulatory affairs in diverse positions. And especially previously to COSMED, I was working for Johnson & Johnson as the Reg Affairs Director for EAME region. So today I'm glad to introduce you and to give you a global framework on the EU regulation and the top-level comparison to the GCC regulation. And we'll see that it may not be so different compared to what we may have in mind. So I'm thanking again the Beautyworld Middle East for the invitation. So let's try. Oh, c'est sûr. Okay, so this morning I will start with the big common principle that we have between the EU and the GCC regulation, so about quality, safety and efficacy. Then I will introduce some key different principles about the responsibility and control of compliance. We'll move to concretely what it means on the what and how it is implemented in EU and in the GCC, and we will open to final perspectives. So first, a quick introduction about COSMED. COSMED, who we are. So we are based in France, and we are a trade association. We are representing the small and medium-sized company. And we are supporting them, and we are our key activity is to do some influencing to understand the key constraint of SME and to lobby for the future of the regulation. So we have contacts together with the French, but as well the European authorities. At EU level, we are representing SME United, so we are representing officially the SMEs, and we are regularly exchanging, including with the EU Commission, to understand what are coming in terms of the future EU plans and how and what we can push through regular discussions. So we are as well offering different services because we are not only doing this influencing, we are covering and we are monitoring the regulation about more than 100 countries all over the world. And so this is a service we can provide to our members to help them understand in real time what is the current regulation and the changes coming, what it will mean. And we have as well a service we can offer in 48 hours to answer any of the questions they may have. We are providing training as well, and as you may know, for some countries there's a need for free self-certificates. This is something we can provide as well. Okay, so you see more detail here on the two big database we offer. You've got the contact, and at the end of this session, we can exchange as well if you want more information on how we can help and support you. So let's start. Three common basic principles that we have. Again, today's aim is to compare EU and GCC regulations. So this is where it's really like maybe obvious, but this is where we have a common framework. So in terms of the safety, the idea is really to ensure that we deliver product on the market that will be safe for the general population, for the population for which we design our product. And it all starts with the first step, which is the ingredient safety. And one important principle is that as such an ingredient may have a hazard, but the idea is to assess it into the final formula and this is what is called the risk-based assessment, to understand in the end a substance which as such may be dangerous, but when formulated in the proper environment and for dedicated usage would be safe for the consumer. So this is the idea, and in terms of the regulation, it comes with some ingredient restriction, with some limitation. It can be as well ingredients which are forbidden, and so usually it's kind of this common framework we have. Then so ingredient is the first part, then we move to the finished product safety, and this is where the principle, it really relies on predictive assessment. So the idea is that you assess into your formula what it could imply for your consumer. So this is why you need a qualified professional, usually a toxicologist, who can define, depending on the structure of each ingredient, depending on the mixture, and depending on some toxicological endpoints, to predict, in the end, the safety of the formula. So it's really as well important here to consider the use, the exposure, the population it is designed to, because for sure it will influence this assessment. And afterward, you may have to confirm this prediction through some testing of the products. But here again, it depends. It may not be mandatory, and we'll see later some of the more concrete framework. But here, now we are in the general framework part. So, okay, you have assessed your ingredient, you have assessed your formula, you put your product on the market, and so then the last step and security steps is what is called the cosmetovigilance. So here, this is where you will understand why your product is put really on the market, and the population you targeted is exposed to it, where you will understand if your prediction was good, and so you need to monitor the safety of your product, and you need to understand any potential adverse event, because we are clear, even if you've done your best, the zero risk does not exist. So you need to collect those data, and that you will need to assess. We'll see later as well some of the related framework on how you should do that. And in terms of the adverse event, for sure, there's a specific attention which should be considered for the most serious one. So this is where you have a gradation into this assessment. This is for safety. Now we move to quality, which is the second big common principle we have between EU and GCC regulation. So here the principle is that you understand and you define some specification for your product, and that afterwards you ensure during the timeline and the lifetime of your product and during at each level, actually, from your production up to the end of life of your product, that you will ensure the conformity to those specifications. So we are talking about physicochemical specification, microbiological as well specification, and so how you can define those potential limitations in terms of contaminants, impurities, and make sure that actually it is ensured for your product. So you have the specification, and then in terms of how you will ensure as well that your formula is of good quality. Again, it's a very common principle. It's called the good manufacturing practices, and here it's how you will define and you will document some criteria, some processes, and how you will make sure that it applies to your ingredient, to your premises, to your personnel, as well as you make sure that you document, what you will do, you do it, and you document that you've done it. So you need to afterwards potentially prove that you really put this system in place, and that you make sure it's really a reality. And so in the end, all of that, we ensure that you have a product which is reproducible, and you can ensure the traceability all along the lifetime. And we previously saw that is so critical as you need to ensure as well the cosmetovigilance. So this will apply to any aspect, so raw material, management, production, control, packaging. So again, all along your chain, you need to have this documentation and those principles applied. So this is how you will reassure your consumer and the authorities. So now we move to the last common framework we have between GCC and EU, which is about efficacy. So efficacy is critical. This is the first thing that your consumer will see when they buy your products, and this is what will attract them to buy it. So this is where you need a specific attention to make sure that your product will not be misleading for your consumer, and that what you claim is in line with the consumer expectation and the reality of the support that you have on your product. So this is where there may be a temptation from marketing sometimes to go beyond the reality of the claim. And this is where the regulatory affairs, they have a very tricky job to make sure that we have a good balance between indeed what you have in terms of testing, in terms of support, and up to where you can advertise the reality of the effect on the skin. So there's some, again, some very, it could seem basic, but this is what should drive your decision. So some principle about not going beyond the definition of the cosmetic. Whatever EU of GCC regulation, you have a definition, and it's really my advice to always come back to it. It may seem basic, but it's always very insightful. Your claim must not be deceptive or unclear. So it's always good as well to stay in the mind of, okay, I am an average consumer. What should I perceive? And this is where it's good as well to ask advice from your colleagues or from people who are not in the business to understand their expectations. The claim should not be unfair towards competitors. You should not denigrate the competitors. And finally, yes, it should be substantiated. So you should make sure that, again, you have the proper testing or rational. It's not always necessary to have a testing. And that you can show it to an authority, and that you are strong, to defend the case and to explain what you did, your approach, and what you believe that is relevant for consumers. So we move then to the next part, which is about some key different principles that we have between GCC and EU, and more generally between some regulatory framework. And the key difference is around responsibility and control of compliance. And so we have two big different approaches. So the first one, it's about in-market control. So here it's really the responsibility is under the manufacturer, who makes sure that he complies with the requirement, that if needed, he builds the proper dossier, he runs the proper testing. And then so he stores everything, and then usually there's a notification system in this principle. So he will notify the product, put the product on the market, and then the control will rely on the authority, but it will be only potentially in a second step, and it will not be systematic. So it's really from time to time, and later on as well I will show you the type of principles the authority used to define the frequency of those controls. Then the second...
The JPMS air show is about to start in 15 minutes. Please make your way
So then the second big approach is pre-market registration. So here you first need to show your documentation to an authority, you register it, you get an approval, and then only you will market your product. So this is a big difference, and here for sure it's a systematic review that you have on your product. So it may be a bit longer because it can take, depending on the country, on the principle, a few days or a few months to get this approval. Usually as well there's some fee associated to it. So this is something you need to anticipate when you, in your R&D process, this additional timeline for such kind of market.
Very good question.
So we move now to the concrete part on the what and the how, and we will start with the EU. So we'll go to review on the different common principles where we started from with the safety, quality, efficacy, and so starting with the EU. So in terms of the safety, a big principle that we have in one of the first articles of the EU regulation is the fact that your product that you make available on the market should be safe for human health when used under normal and reasonably foreseeable condition of use. So it may be obvious, but I mean in this definition, every word is important and should be considered. And again, this is where you should document this aspect, and you should make it accessible to the authority. So in EU, it's called a product information file that you stored and which contain all those elements. We'll see afterward more how it looks like. And in terms on how to ensure as well the safety, we saw that basic aspect is about ingredient review. And so here we have in the EU regulation a principle of ingredient restriction. So we have some ingredients which are forbidden, and we have as well some ingredients where we have a limitation in terms of maximum percentage to use. On top of that, we have labeling requirements. So here, to ensure the safety, it's really key that you make very clear the usage instruction, any potential safety warning. So it's not mandatory. It's just that your safety assessor needs to assess based on the ingredient composition, formula, type of use, for which population your product is aimed at. It should define, if needed, which would be those usage instruction and warning, and it should be overall very coherent, and you should defend that. So we have as well ingredient listing to inform your consumer about the content of it. And afterwards, we have as well, in terms of the safety cosmetovigilance, you should follow up your adverse event with some regular frequency. You should put in place a process, and in case there's a serious adverse event on your market, there's a specific process where you should report it to the authorities, and internally you should decide and define, depending on those regular reports, any adjustment you may need to do in terms of the formulation or in terms of the labeling if the usage instruction was not clear enough. So this is really a principle of regular reviews. Not just you put the product on the market and that's done. You should really monitor this safety aspect. Then in terms of the quality, so very common principle that applies are the GMP, the good manufacturing principle. So after you have this ISO 22716 that you should, that is like the official reference, after you're free to use an equivalent standard. It's really up to you to defend that it allows you to have product in line with those principles. Efficacy, so we mentioned the cosmetic in definition, so important. And on top of that, we have some common criteria that you should follow up, which are about truthfulness and fairness. So again, it may seem like basic principle, but it's really well explained and with very concrete example on those 6 common criteria. So if you don't know them, I really encourage you to have a look. So similarly, how do we apply those principles? So we saw the safety. So I told you there's a product information file. And into this information file, there's a very critical document which is called a CPSR, a Cosmetic Product Safety Report, which should be done by a recognized toxicologist, really an expert with some specific diploma. And it's composed of 2 parts. In the first part, you collect like all your safety information about your ingredient, about the testing you've done, in terms of the safety, in terms of the efficacy as well. Any element of the specification, similarly on your ingredient, on your finished product, stability, etc. And then you, in the second part, which is called the part B, this is where the safety assessor is, based on all those elements, arguing and explaining and concluding on why the product is safe, why he decided about a specific usage instruction or specific warning, and why in the end all of that confirms that the product is safe and can be put on the market. So afterward, yes, we mentioned that we have some ingredient restrictions. So in Europe, it's part of some specific annexes. And we have some a positive list for some category: colorant, preservative, UV filter. So it's really important. It means that for those functions, you absolutely need to use product from those lists. You cannot use a colorant which is not listed in those annexes. You cannot use a UV filter which is not part, again, of those annexes. So it's really a referential. And similarly, we have a negative list. So here we talk about ingredients which are banned or restricted, and here it's really an official list to follow. In terms of adverse events, there are some guidelines to follow to help the company put in place a proper process and to explain how to assess an adverse event. There's a notion of causality assessment. And so, again, it's very helpful to help put in place those systems. Quality we mentioned, we have this official ISO GMP, which is really the recommended preferred standard. And in terms of efficacy, so we have those 6 common criteria. And on top, we have some guidelines on claim and claim substantiation in Europe, which again are key referential when you are a company and you don't really know how to put this in place. Those are very, very helpful and supportive documents. So in terms of the responsibility for compliance and enforcement, because we see that this is where we may have the more differences between EU and GCC. In EU, we have the notion of responsible person. So this is, by the way, a part of the labeling. You should clearly identify who is the responsible person. So usually it's the name of the company based in Europe and responsible of the compliance and of this product dossier. And this is where the authority would go to inspect your product. And in Europe, so the principle is what we reviewed previously in market control. So here you notify your product in a database, which is called the CPNP. And once you have notified, you don't have to wait, you don't expect any approval. You can just then put your product on the market, and you may get inspection, but afterward. This is this principle of in-market control. And so, yeah, and they do it in terms of random checks. So they will not check systematically. So the principle to check is based on risk priorities. So it depends. You may have, they may decide, okay, this year we'll do a campaign on sun care. because they may have seen on the market that there may be some adverse event. It can be as well about some regular campaign. So usually, for example, in France, they will inspect a company with a rhythm of every 3 years. So they come and they ask your product dossier on some specific file. Or it can be as well based on the complaints from a consumer who may complain on the product, and then the authority decide to come and to inspect your product file. So yeah, in terms of market control, what they would do usually, they will go in the shop, pick up your product, and they will do some testing, and they will review and check if your ingredients are in line with the list of ban and restriction ingredients. They will check. In Europe, we have some allergens to label. They will check if you are beyond or below those labeling limitations. And after, they may come and ask for the element of the product dossier, because the product dossier, this is not something you notify. You keep it in your company. But then if you get this in-market inspection, they will come and they will ask you specifically about this product. You mentioned it's moisturizing. I want to show the testing proving that it's moisturizing. So they may not ask the full dossier. Usually it's more dedicated points they have in mind depending on the topic of the inspection. They may ask your cosmetovigilance report to show and usually as well they review what is your process to make sure they want to understand if you put in place a proper system. And they can as well review your GMP. They may go to the production part and ask any question, even to the people working there, to understand how and if they follow the GMP. So moving now to the GCC regulation, and I'm not going to cover each and every country. Again, my aim today was more to give a top-level overview. So what is interesting is that we have this GSO 1943-2021, which was updated. So in 2021, before we had a version from 2016. So it's a technical regulation which is mandatory to apply in the GCC countries. So after there are some which already have officially implemented the 2021, like Oman and UAE, and there's some others. The other ones are still under the older version, but progressively they officially as well implement this new standard. So it's really about giving the framework and the requirement. And in terms of the different aspects we saw, which again are the same in Europe and in GCC, about safety, quality, efficacy. What is interesting is that it's really, and this is why I started and I spent time on the EU regulation, it really mirrors the EU cosmetic regulation. So, for example, we see that we have the same principle of ingredient forbidden and restriction. There are some additional restrictions in this GSO. For example, about retinol, urea, or AHA. But overall, it's very close. In terms of the GMP, similarly, the referential is this ISO norms. And there's no requirement about official certification. It's that you have to prove you follow this ISO. And again, there's the same principle about truthful claim approach with those principles, which are again common basic principle, but which applies. And especially we have those 6 EU, the EU common criteria, which are the same and which are as well implemented in the GCC country. One difference we have is that on top in the GCC countries we have a list of unacceptable claims. This is this additional GSO you see here. And for example, some claims about reverting aging or removing fat are part of this unacceptable claim list. So on the other way around, it does not mean that in Europe you can do them. In Europe, it's not part of a negative list, but in a way it's kind of obvious because it's part of your common criteria where, and a part of the cosmetic definition where your products are supposed to act on the skin appearance. So in a way, they are not supposed to revert aging and they are not supposed to remove fat. But in Europe, we don't have this kind of negative list principle. This is the difference. What we have here as well is that we have per product type some norms and for some ingredients. So we have a norm for hair care, a norm for lip care, we have so many. And we have for some ingredients, like for example Vaseline, we have specific norms. So into those norms you can find some requirements about impurity content, efficacy testing. Again, here it's a norm, so as such it's not mandatory, but then each of the GCC country we specify and mention if they are mandatory or not. So yeah, again, here it's really like the general framework principle. And then we move to a framework of implementation and as well in terms of how the compliance is managed. So meaning, and we'll see afterward, we have some country with a notification principle, quite similar to Europe, and some other with a registration principle. So I'm not going to review each country. I just decided to take two of them. So we start with Saudi Arabia. So here they are still with the GSO standard from 2016. But what is interesting is that progressively and regularly they publish some circular to implement the revision that we see in the EU regulation. So in the end, progressively, they start as well to be in compliance with the 2021. Yeah, and something I did not tell you about the 2021 is that, and it was new and it was a big difference compared to the 2016, is that now we have a dynamic link to the EU regulation in terms of the ingredient changes. So it means that any time in Europe there's a change in the ingredient restriction, in a way there's this dynamic connection, so it's directly applicable to in the GCC country having the GSO standard from 2021. So what is interesting as well here for Saudi Arabia, it's that before it was a pre-market registration system, and that now it has moved to a system more common to Europe, an in-market control system. So here the principle is that you would notify your product on the eCosma portal, where there would be some few checks, but as such it's not like a registration. And afterwards, what you need, so it will deliver you a specific number once you have done this notification, and on top of that, you would need a certificate of conformity. So this certificate can be delivered to you by a notified body. Certification body. So it's quite simple. So the first step is this ECOSMA notification, and then you will see that there's some testing to be done to get this certification of conformity. And here again, it will depend on some of the GSO norms and per product type. So logical, we have those certification fees. And you will need to pass the custom clearance to get your ECOSMA number plus this certificate of conformity. So what happened here? We mentioned this in-market control. This is the case here. So we have the SFDA, which may perform afterwards some in-market inspection, and they may control your labeling. They may run some laboratory testing, and again, they can request to you any part of documentation from your dossier. So now moving to UAE. So here they recently implemented the version of 2021. And here this is a good example of a registration country. So here really indeed you need to register your product. So you submit your registration file to a notified body. This includes some specific testing. And it depends on the product type. So again, I'm not going to detail. You have some service fees, logical as well, and then so it's reviewed, and in the end you get what is called an ESMA conformity certificate, which is valid for 1 year, and that afterwards you have to renew every year. And here, yeah, something specific for Dubai is that we have an additional registration to run on the Montage portal, which will be valid for 5 years. And where first to do that, you need this ESMA certificate of conformity. And on top, in Dubai, they have some specific ingredient ban about Lilial and Niran. So opening to, now moving to the conclusion and the final perspective and opening, but I think the interesting point is that finally the GCC and the EU regulation, it's interesting to see that they are not so different. It may be something that we believe because we know that we have this registration principle that we don't have in Europe in the GCC. That's true, but in the end, they are all based on the safety, quality, and efficacy principle. And there's a lot of interconnection, meaning that for sure the EU regulation inspired a lot the GCC regulation. So it's interesting, and it's a positive point when you want to do business in those two areas. So after, yeah, we saw for sure there are some differences, especially in terms of those registration and some of those norms and standards which are different. And I wanted to open finally about future perspective, and for you to know that things are moving in Europe. We have a new strategy for the chemical product, and it's under a bigger strategy about what is called the Green Deal, for a safer environment, and to protect even more humans and the environment. And so here we expect a revision of the EU cosmetic regulation. So it's already starting in the sense that we already started to have some consultation, and within COSMED we already exchanged with the EU Commission, and we provided some for recommendation and warnings about the different options they have in mind, because today it's not something concrete. It's about different options that the EU Commission would like to implement. And just to give you a taste of it, and maybe I come back next year to tell you more, we have some potential option about new safety concept. So there's this generic risk assessment And the idea would be about an ingredient which has a specific hazard that then you would assess it for a whole family of the similar chemicals. And our fear here is that we may end up in a situation where we assess and the authority assess the hazard, and may, because there is an hazard on this ingredient, directly forbid it without considering this risk assessment principle, which is so key for us and which is as well very relevant from scientific point of view. So we are a bit worried here, and we passed all our messages that we believe that it should really put in the perspective of the final risk for the consumer, and this is not because we have a hazard on an ingredient that it should be directly banned. But we see as well the idea from the Commission about an essential usage, where an ingredient, if there's an hazard, should be forbidden unless there's an essential. It is essential. So here there's a big question about what it means to be essential. What's the definition they have in mind? Is it at an ingredient level? Is it for specific usage? Is it for cosmetic compared to other categories? So this is a very top level, just option and discussion, but for you to know that they really have it in mind. And the last one is mixture assessment. So you may know that today in Europe we have a principle of that you assess, as a safety assessor assess what is called the margin of safety, and as long as your margin of safety is above 100, it passes, and then it clears the safety of your product. Here they may want to introduce some additional factors, meaning that we may need to have tomorrow to pass 200 or 500 in terms of this margin of safety. And here again, we believe that it's not really realistic, that it's not science, and that we may end up to lose some ingredient or to lose some product with this principle. So we are fighting a lot against it. And the final point, which is a more positive one, we believe, is that we see that the EU Commission, they start to open the discussion and the debate on how tomorrow it may be possible to digitalize some of the information we have on labeling. So it does not mean they will accept it, but at least it's good that they open the question. Because you know that today we have so many requirements to have on packaging that we can hardly read everything. And there's even more planned, because tomorrow they want us to label some more information on the environmental impact, for example. But we're already full. We have no space. We need to, all those translation. So we see that here they open to a potential option, so to be discussed, because it will not be for the whole labeling, at least as the first steps, but it may be for the information which are not so critical for consumers, and where they could get access through a mobile app. So a lot of discussion, because then some authority would say, but not all consumers, they have a mobile app, not in every area you get access to internet. But we're very glad that this discussion is opening for our industry. So that's it for me. I want to thank you. You've got here my contact detail. If you want more information on COSMED, or if you have any question, I'm very glad to help and to exchange, to discuss. And I just wanted to finally mention that next year we will have, as we regularly have every year, a regulatory days in COSMED on the 21 and 22nd of March. It can be, so it will be in Paris, but it can be as well, you can attend it remotely, and all the presentation will be translated in English. So we have French, English, and you can. We have a direct translator, and we have the first day dedicated to European regulations and to news and update. And we will welcome the EU Commission. They will be present to this session. And the second day is more dedicated to international regulations, and we have some updates on different parts of the world. And we are so glad we are finalizing the program, so it's not complete yet. So again, you can contact me if you want more information, if you want to receive the final program and all the details. I'm happy to give you those details. So thanks again, and I'm here for any questions.
Hi, a very good morning to all of you. I just want to know all this regulation related to cosmetic. Do we have a well-defined regulation for natural and organic products as of now in UAE and EU?
Do you? Sorry, I don't hear very well. Do we? Maybe I get closer to you.
Oh, sorry. Can I speak louder?
Yeah, it's better. Yeah.
Okay. So, do we have well-defined regulations for cosmetic product for natural and organic origin?
Yeah, we have. In Europe?
And in UAE, both, if you can suggest.
In UAE, I'm not so... Maybe you can ask later, we'll have Dubai municipality. But in Europe, yes, we have. So in Europe, clearly we have a framework for natural, which is based on some ISO norms. And which define indeed what is a natural product, and you have to do some calculation on your ingredient to define and to assess whether you pass indeed this natural criteria. And in Europe, what we have as well, it's a lot of labels that you can apply to if you want to claim that you are organic. And there's a variety of labels with some different certification criteria to claim that. Yeah.
So if I will try to implement the same regulations what is there in EU, most probably it will be also accepted in UAE market. Is that true?
It will be probably what?
If I want to formulate as per the regulation of EU, and most probably if I'll just go and inquire here or give my samples, will be also well accepted in UAE. That is what, is that true?
The lady say no.
No?
No, I must say I'm not so familiar on the organic and the bio and natural aspect for UAE. But maybe we can exchange later on this aspect.
Thank you for a very clear and very, very helpful presentation. It's a whole topic in itself, but I just wondered, within this framework, if you, in your organization, have any concern about the regulation of nano ingredients.
Yeah, that's another one. That's true, I did not mention it on my final slide, but we know that, yes, it will be part of the revision, the coming revision of the EU regulation, because we have already a new definition for a nanomaterial, which has been, actually, so far it's a recommendation in Europe, but we welcome it, in fact, because today there was a lot of unclarity on the definition. So now we know that it will be aligned. So the idea and the question now is how it will be implemented into the EU cosmetic regulation itself, because it will be, and how it will be processed in a way, because the definition is good, but there are still many questions on characterization on what is a nano. So our point, and we are working as well with GRC in Europe, so that they can update the current guideline that we have on nano, and to clarify and to provide true guideline and support to the company on how to characterize those nano. So no, actually for us it's quite a positive point that we have this nano definition alignment. Yeah. Okay, but thank you so much. Don't hesitate if you have more questions afterwards, and I'm glad that after we have Dubai municipality presenting an update on the regulation as well. Thank you again.